On the morning of April 28, 1789, Captain William Bligh of the Royal Navy vessel Bounty found himself bound to a mast on his ship's deck. Around him stood his rebellious crew, debating whether to spare his life or end it. The mutiny was led by Fletcher Christian, Bligh's own second-in-command. Once close companions, it was likely their past camaraderie that had kept Bligh alive. Christian had fiercely argued against the other mutineers' desire to kill the captain, insisting they spare him despite their deep hatred. Bligh was a complicated man. Though upright and dutiful, his arrogance and fiery temper made him a harsh leader. He often belittled his officers in front of the crew, with Christian bearing the brunt of these humiliations. The seeds of rebellion had been sown long before that fateful day, and a more empathetic captain might have acted to prevent it. The Bounty had embarked on a mission to transport breadfruit plants from the Pacific to the West Indies, where plantation owners hoped to use them as cheap food for enslaved laborers. After enduring a grueling voyage, the crew had recently enjoyed a prolonged stay in Tahiti, relishing the island's beauty and the warm hospitality of its people. Returning to the strict regime of life at sea proved jarring, and Bligh, frustrated by what he saw as laziness, enforced discipline with increasing severity. In the days leading up to the mutiny, he escalated his public scorn of Christian, pushing his loyal lieutenant beyond the limits of his patience. Christian, like much of the crew, longed to return to Tahiti and its idyllic life. But the mutineers faced two significant challenges: deciding the fate of Captain Bligh and addressing the loyalists among the crew. 18 men had remained faithful to Bligh and were being held under guard. Despite his anger, Christian could not bring himself to kill Bligh or the loyal crew members. They were his shipmates, and he bore no personal grudge against them. Instead, a compromise was reached. Bligh and his loyalists would be set adrift in a small boat, stocked with provisions. That morning, Bligh and his 18 supporters were forced off the Bounty at bayonet point and crammed into the ship's launch. The boat was laden with just 5 days' worth of food and water, along with a few basic navigation tools. The mutineers jeered as the launch pulled away, leaving Bligh and his men to face an uncertain fate. Christian, while sparing their lives, had consigned them to a perilous journey with slim chances of survival. As the Bounty disappeared into the horizon, Bligh and his men were left alone on the vast ocean. Their small craft, designed only for short trips between ship and shore, was wholly inadequate for the voyage ahead. Though the seas were calm for now, the region was notorious for violent storms. Conditions aboard the launch were dire. Overcrowding meant there was no space to lie down, and the men were cold, wet, and perpetually hungry. They had to bail water constantly to keep the boat afloat. Tension simmered among the crew. Some blamed Bligh for their plight, their loyalty driven more by fear of legal repercussions than genuine respect. They knew the consequences of mutiny, exile at best, or a brutal execution if captured. Bligh, with his experience sailing these waters alongside the renowned explorer Captain Cook, understood the dangers they faced better than anyone. He knew their nearest sanctuary lay 3,900 miles away, at a Dutch trading post in Kupang on the island of Timor. Reaching it would mean navigating treacherous seas for 50 days, but it was their only hope of survival. Captain William Bligh understood that their survival depended on securing food, so he steered the small launch toward Tofua Island, a landmass they had seen the night before the mutiny. He knew nothing about the island's inhabitants and could only hope they would be welcoming. The crew brought their cramped boat to shore, landing on a sandy cove. Relieved to escape the confines of the launch, they stretched their legs and searched for sustenance. Their efforts yielded little more than a few coconuts. The next day, islanders arrived and initially greeted the castaways warmly, trading food for trinkets like buttons and beads. However, once the islanders realized Bligh and his men were stranded and defenseless, their demeanor shifted. They grew bolder and more menacing. Tensions quickly escalated into a dangerous standoff. Bligh recognized the ominous signs: groups of islanders gathering, clacking stones together in a threatening rhythm. It was behavior he had witnessed before in the days leading to Captain Cook's tragic demise. Summoning his crew close, Bligh whispered his grim assessment.
These people mean to kill us. We must leave tonight, but our departure may provoke them. Here's the plan. We'll quietly load the launch as night falls and tell them we plan to sleep at sea. Come morning, we'll claim we'll return to trade.
The men, keenly aware of their peril, trusted Bligh's leadership. As darkness settled over the beach, they worked in hushed urgency to prepare the launch. But as they crept toward the boat, the islanders sprang into action. They rose as one, clashing stones together and pelting the men with rocks. In the chaos, the ship's quartermaster, John Norton, turned to confront the attackers, bravely standing his ground. His valor cost him his life. He was struck down and beaten to death, but his sacrifice allowed the others to scramble aboard the launch. Pursued into the shallows, Bligh and his crew resorted to throwing clothing into the water to distract their assailants. The ploy worked. The islanders stopped to retrieve the garments, giving the launch enough time to push into the safety of open waters. Bruised and shaken, the crew drifted in silence, leaving the island and its dangers behind. Passing other lush green isles on their journey, no one dared suggest landing again. The harsh memory of Tofua had crushed any such thoughts. Provisions aboard the launch were woefully insufficient for a journey that might last weeks. The crew had salvaged a few coconuts from Tofua, some spoiled ship's biscuits, a limited supply of salted pork, 12 bottles of rum, and several barrels of fresh water. Bligh, aware that survival hinged on strict rationing, addressed his crew from the stern.
By the grace of God, this journey could take 50 days or more. Our provisions are scarce. Each man will receive just 1 ounce of biscuit and a quarter pint of water daily. I ask each of you to vow, here and now, to accept these rations without complaint or requests for more.
Bligh's confidence and authority seemed to inspire his weary crew. They all pledged to abide by the meager allotment, and despite their grim circumstances, spirits were momentarily lifted as they rowed away from Tofua. For 2 days, the launch sailed steadily, but on the third morning, a red sun rose in the sky, a clear harbinger of a coming storm. Worse still, as they passed Waya Island, 2 large sailing canoes appeared on the horizon, heading directly for the launch. Panic rippled through the crew. They feared that if the canoes caught them, the islanders would not only kill them, but feast on their remains. The fragile morale of the men faltered as they braced for yet another life-or-death confrontation. Bligh swiftly assumed command, rallying 6 of his strongest men to take the oars. They rowed furiously, desperate to outpace their pursuers. For 3 grueling hours, the canoes shadowed them, but by early afternoon, the chase was finally abandoned. The exhausted crew had barely begun to recover from this ordeal when the weather turned against them. Fierce winds roared, and sheets of rain lashed their fragile boat. That night was one of sheer misery. Bligh recorded in his log,
We bore away across uncharted seas with no stars visible to steer by.
Cold, soaked, and sleepless, the crew endured the tempest as best they could. By dawn, the storm raged on, but Bligh displayed a newfound compassion and ingenuity that might have prevented the mutiny had he shown it earlier. He encouraged his men to remove their wet clothes and rinse them in the warmer seawater. Afterward, he offered each man a small measure of rum, bringing much-needed warmth and comfort. Bligh understood that despondency could be as lethal as the sea. He knew that inactivity would sap his crew's will to survive, so he implemented a strict routine to keep them engaged and hopeful. The crew was divided into 2 groups. One manned the boat, while the other rested at the bottom. They switched every 4 hours, imposing structure on what could have been an unending, shapeless ordeal. To further boost morale, Bligh turned the daily distribution of rations at 8 a.m., noon, and sunset into a drawn-out ritual. Each man's portion was carefully weighed using improvised scales made from coconut shells and pistol bullets. The process absorbed the men's attention, distracting them from their hunger. The rations usually consisted of dry biscuits, but Bligh occasionally surprised them with tiny portions of salted pork, much to their delight. He encouraged the men to savor their meals by breaking them into small pieces and eating slowly, a practice he modeled himself. Occasionally, luck would intervene when a seabird landed on the boat. These birds were swiftly caught, killed, and divided among the crew. They followed a naval custom called "Who shall have this?", in which the bird was chopped into pieces, and one man would point to a piece, while another, blindfolded or facing away, called out a name. In this way, fairness was ensured, and even the captain might end up with the least desirable parts, such as the beak or feet. Bligh recorded with wry humor the crew's laughter when he received these unappetizing portions. Bligh also kept spirits up by sharing tales from his previous voyages and encouraging the crew to recount their own adventures. As a skilled navigator, he drew maps to show their progress and explained their route to Kupang in Timor. Each evening, he led the men in prayers, humbly asking for their meager rations to sustain them on their journey. When morale dipped, he turned to sailors' songs, and his cheerful leadership inspired the men to join in. One of Bligh's cleverest moves was assigning the crew to stitch together a makeshift Union Jack, using scraps of signal flags they had salvaged. He assured them that this flag would identify them when they reached Kupang, but the task served a greater purpose. It kept the men occupied and symbolized hope for the end of their ordeal. For 15 arduous days, the small boat battled relentless storms, leaving the crew soaked to the bone and chilled to the core. Captain Bligh, ever diligent, kept a meticulous log where he noted,
"The rain and salt left us nearly blind. We looked ghastly, and every glance met a face etched with despair. Hunger had become undeniable. Any sleep we managed was amidst water, and we woke up stiff and aching."
Worse challenges lay ahead. By the 21st day, Bligh recognized that their supply of biscuits wouldn't suffice. He made the difficult decision to reduce the daily ration from 3 portions to 2. Though the men accepted the news without complaint, Bligh recorded in his log that it felt akin to stealing their lifeblood. Finally, on May 24th, Bligh documented a rare moment of relief.
"For the first time in 15 days, we felt the sun's warmth and comfort."
The men pressed on, though visibly deteriorating. A week later, faint signs of land brought fresh hope. This was no island, which they had been avoiding for safety, but the vast expanse of Australia, then referred to as New Holland. At first, a broken branch floated by. Soon, birds circled the boat, and clouds, often formed near coastlines, appeared consistently on the western horizon. When the roar of waves crashing against rocks reached them on the wind, they knew solid ground was near. On May 28th, their small craft navigated carefully through the Great Barrier Reef. Despite fears of what might await them on this largely uncharted and potentially hostile land, the men were overjoyed at the prospect of setting foot on dry land. They landed on an uninhabited island that Bligh named Restoration Island. Many of the men were too weak to stand, while others feasted ravenously on oysters from the rocks. That evening, using a copper pot salvaged from the Bounty, they prepared a stew of oysters and pork. Each man enjoyed a generous pint of the hearty meal. Bligh warned them against consuming the unfamiliar fruits and berries surrounding them, as some could be toxic. However, hunger drove many to ignore his caution. Bligh's authority, which had maintained order on the boat, quickly unraveled on land. Disputes erupted as he insisted on a communal approach to resources, prioritizing care for the weaker crew members. Others, exhausted and famished, argued for self-preservation over sharing. When one seaman openly defied him, Bligh brandished his cutlass, vowing. This restored discipline, albeit tenuously. The strained and fractious crew set sail once more, heading for Timor. The brief respite on land did little to improve their health or morale. 10 days later, when land appeared again, most were too frail to celebrate. On June 14, 1789, 47 days after the infamous mutiny, Bligh's launch arrived at Kupang, where they raised the Union Jack. Bligh's log reflected both pride and sorrow.
Our emaciated bodies were covered in sores, and we were dressed in rags. The people of Timor viewed us with a mix of shock, compassion, and disbelief.
From Kupang, they traveled to Java and eventually boarded a Dutch merchant ship for the journey home. The trip to England spanned 9 months, during which some crew members succumbed to their weakened state. Arguments continued, with Bligh imprisoning 2 men for accusing him of falsifying expenses. Despite his flaws and irascible temperament, Captain William Bligh had accomplished a remarkable feat. He navigated a perilous 3,900-mile journey, ensuring that 11 of his crew survived to reunite with their families. And that's the incredible story of the Bounty Mutiny and the remarkable journeys of Captain Bligh and Fletcher Christian. What do you think? Was Captain Bligh a misunderstood hero, or was Fletcher Christian justified in leading the mutiny? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your take on this historic drama. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our future stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.